Three, two, one.
Hey guys, this is an episode of Scott Talks Law, and welcome to another episode of Scott Talks Law. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the land tenure system in Kenya. So land tenure refers to the terms and conditions upon which rights relating to land are acquired, used, disposed of, or transmitted. And the tenure system refers to the relations among people in the society in respect to the scarce available resources related to land. So the relationship among people in the society is referred to as the tenure system in respect to the essential scarce resources related to land. So the tenure systems are culture specific and dynamic. They keep on changing, and they change as the social, economic, and political situations of the group change. So land tenure ordinarily has at least three dimensions. We have people, time, and space. So there are three dimensions of the land tenure system: time, people, and space. So as so far as people are concerned, it is the interaction between different persons that determine the exact limit of the rights of any person has to a given parcel of land. So how people interact will determine the rights of those people in respect to that piece of land. So these rights are ordinarily and not absolute, since the rules are given, since the rules that govern these rights are absolute and not ordinarily, since there are rules that govern the manner in which persons with the tenure is to utilize those rights. So these rights are not they are not absolute rights. They are ordinary rights, because there are some rules that govern the mode of acquisition of land, the use of those. There are rules that govern the rights to land. So the time aspect of tenure determines the duration of one has to a particular piece of land, while spatial dimension limits the physical area over which rights to land is to be exercised. So we say there are three dimensions of the land tenure. We have time, spatial dimension, and the person or people. So the time dimension refers to that time that this person has that right to land. The duration, if it's adverse possession, that 12-year period will determine. So the spatial dimension limits the physical area over which rights is to be exercised. The spatial dimension of tenure may be difficult to determine in exclusive terms, since different persons may exercise different rights over the same space or different time. So it is difficult to determine this spatial dimension. So because different persons may exercise different rights to land over the same space or of different times. So it is imperative that one understands the land tenure system obtained in Kenya, so as to appreciate the different legal formalities available for the transfer of interest in land under the different land tenure system, the historical event, and the patterns that have impacted the land laws and conveyance in Kenya. So you just need to understand this land tenure system to understand the history that relates to land, the formalities available, legal formalities, and the transfer of interests to land. You must first understand the land tenure system. So, and the historical events that have impacted land and conveyance in Kenya. So there are three main land tenure systems in Kenya as defined by the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So there are three main land tenure systems. We have modern land tenure system, community land tenure system, and private land tenure system. So that is according to Article 62, 63, and 64. Article 62 is about the public land, 63 is about the community land, and 64 is about the private land. So the modern it's also called the individual tenure, public holding, and customary or community land or group tenure. So in advent of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, the Constitution perceives perception have been installed whose effect is to define land and tenure system in Kenya with finality. According to Chapter 5 of the Constitution on Land and Environment, identify 3 land tenure systems. So public land, community land, and private land. So these tenure systems are established in that hierarchy that perhaps also reflects the status of the ranking of the tenure system. So that hierarchy, public, community, and private, 62, 63, and 64. And it perhaps also reflects the status or the ranking of tenure system. So that hierarchy reflects the status or the ranking of the tenure system. So public land tenure system, Article 62. So this system of public tenure system, so the system of public tenure stems from the idea of notion of state or the owner of radical title. So the state is the owner of the radical title under public land tenure. So the public tenure therefore designates the government as private landowner and follows the provision of the Crown Land Ordinance of 1902 as they are subsequently amended and embodied in the GLA, which has now been replaced by Land Legislation Act. So the GLA is the Government Legislation Act, which has now been replaced by the Land Legislation Act number 3 of 2012. So the public tenure therefore is a province of the government, is for the government and land. So the public tenure therefore is a province of the government land or public land. Government land in Kenya is the land that was vested in the government of Kenya by section 200. So Article 62 of the Constitution of Kenya provides for public land to include the following: land which at the effective date was unalienated government land defined by the Act of Parliament in force at the effective date; land lawfully held by any state by the way of sale, reverse, or surrender. So if this land was held by state by the way of sale, reverse, or surrender, that automatically becomes public land. Land lawfully held by any state organ except land that is occupied by the state organ as a lessee under a private lease. So if this land is held by state organ but not a lease, not under private lease, then that land automatically becomes public land. So land which no individual or community ownership can be established by any legal process, and land which no heir can be identified by any legal process. So when someone dies and there's no heir who can identify himself with that particular piece of land, then that land automatically goes to the government. Someone has died and has left no heir, that land automatically goes to the state, and the state shall offer it as a grant. So according to this provision, land which all minerals and mineral oils are defined by law are also public land. Government forests other than forests under Article 63(2) of community land are also defined as public or government's land. Government forests and reserves, game reserves, water catchment areas, national park, government animal sanctuaries, and specifically protected areas. All roads and thoroughfares provided for by Act of Parliament. All rivers, lakes, and other water bodies defined by the Act of Parliament. Territorial sea and exclusive economic zones and seabed, continental shelf, all roads. So this, you cannot establish anything in that particular area because that land has been classified as government land. So territorial sea and exclusive economic seabeds and continental shelf are classified too as the public land. Any land declared to be public by Act of Parliament in line at the effective date or The form of land tenure system is the customary land tenure system. And this form of land tenure system is covered under Article 63 of the Kenyan Constitution. And customary land law tenure system largely was dominated by colonialism in Kenya. But the system has been significantly replaced by agrarian policy introduced by colonial government. So this system of communal and system of customary land system existed mostly during the colonial period before colonialism. So however, there are some communities and areas in Kenya which still remain under the authority of customary land, over which the application of mobilization process has had significant consequences. It's nevertheless important to study this system of law because it forms the foundation of the regime of law regulating the ownership and possession of property and the process of property transaction in Kenya. So it forms the law of regulation of property, and also forms the law of property transaction in Kenya, this community land ownership. So if you want to understand more about this property transaction in Kenya and law regulations, this form of community land ownership, this form of land tenureship of community land ownership is important. So customary land law tenure owes its legitimacy to traditional communities where land was owned by community basis by different tribes, groups of people who lived in the region presently known as Kenya. So it owes its foundation of origin in traditional aspects of communities where people lived in communities and owned land. So that is the history of community land ownership in Kenya before colonial rule. So people used to exist in community, and different communities, different tribes, different social groups existed together, and they had land as a community. So when colonial people came, they disrupted that thing of community land ownership. So though Kenya is composed of diverse groups of people and different values and perception, and despite the fact that there are being varying forms of ownership of land, it's possible to discern certain common characteristics in land tenure system of communities. However, it's vital to note that the social transformation of people and their philosophy are determined by the text of the historical stage of development, hunting and gathering, herding and settled farming, etc. were important influence on the land tenure system of each traditional community. So it depends with that community's activity. So if this community was of hunters and gatherers, so their activity there was hunting and gathering, this community owned land according to those practices that they were practicing. So hunters and gatherers lived together and shared a common piece of land as a community of hunters and gatherers. Those who practice herding shared a piece of land, like the Maasais, and they shared that piece of land as hunters and gatherers. So this is the land of Maasais. They are a community. They own it as a community of hunters and gatherers because of their activity, because they know how they herd these cattle and how they take care of their cattle. So it depends on the particular community and their social activities that they practice. So customary land tenure was and still is anchored on the premise that land is much more than the physical soil. Like in many other African societies, traditional and philosophy ascribed a sacred significance to land. So there's this sacred significance to land, and they view land as more significant thing than soil itself. So in particular, land did not belong to one particular person but God. So there is some spirituality. So they view land to belong that is greater than the soil, and land has been given by God So the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry into the Land Law Systems of Kenya captured this phenomenon in the following terms in its 2002 report, the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry. So according to the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry, for indigenous Kenya, land also has important spiritual value. For land is not merely a factor of production. It is first and foremost the medium which defines and binds together social and spiritual relations with and across generation. Issues about ownership and control are valued as much about the structure of social and cultural relationships. They are about access to material livelihood. This is one reason why debates about land tenure in Africa always revolves around the structure and dynamics of lineage and cultural community rather than strict judicial principles and precedents. That's why you find that there are alternative ways of dispute resolution, because dispute related to land cannot just be solved by judicial principles and precedents, because there's some spiritualities, there's some beliefs among those particular communities. That's why it will resolve around the dynamics of and lineages of cultural communities. So there's some spirituality in this community land ownership. That's according to the Jonjo Commission of Inquiry. That it's also important to consider the dynamics of particular communities and society rather than it's important to consider the dynamics and structures of those particular communities. So this meant that members of particular community could exercise certain rights over land in varying degrees of equality with others of the same community. In turn, that right was sacred by virtue of membership in that community, or more specifically by membership into a community or its unit. Of course, required the performance of certain obligations, which in turn define the rights of access and use of land. So the degree of access and use exercised by particular members will also depend on the status of that member. So the status is also included in the degree of practice. So in essence, customary land tenure was inclusive in nature. It includes everybody, every individual. It's not about private people, not about private ownership. This form of tenure is inclusive in nature. It involves all people, members of the community. So this form of land ownership is inclusive in nature. Customary land ownership. So in the Constitution of Kenya, customary land ownership is covered under Article 63 of the Constitution. So the community land shall be held by community identified on the basis of ethnicity, culture, and similar community interests. What are the interests of these people? It's important to note what interests the people have. So to classify that land as a community land, their ethnicity, what is their culture? So according to Article 63, Sub-Article 1, it's important to note the ethnicity and culture of that similar community interest. Sub-Article 2, community land consists of Sub-Article 2A, land registered in the name of group representative under the provision of any law. If you register this land as a group, then it shall be recognized as a community land. Land transferred to the specific community by the process of law. So if the process of law has been involved, court process and all the process of law that led to the transfer of that piece of land to a particular community, then that land shall be recognized as a community land by virtue of Article 63, Sub-Article 2B. Any land to be declared as community land by the Act of Parliament. So if the Act of Parliament recognizes a particular land as a community land, then therefore that land shall be classified as a community land. Land that is lawfully held and managed and used by specific community as a community, like community forest, grazing, shrines, ancestral land, and traditionally occupied by hunters and gatherers. Communities or lawfully held as is in trust by the county government. So land held in trust by county government for the community shall also be recognized as community land. So that is according to the provision of Article 63 of community land ownership. So that is about community land ownership, land that is owned by a particular community group of people with similar culture, ethnicity, sharing the same language, they have the same behavior. So it's important to note these people, their behavior, their culture, activity, so that to classify that particular land as a community land. So if this land belongs to hunters and gatherers, those people have a common practice. They practice hunting and gathering. That's why that land shall be theirs. These people are pastoralists. The activity that they practice is pastoralist activities. So then that land shall be theirs by virtue of their activity and behavior. So people with the same behavior will have form a community and will have land, their own land, as that particular community or group of people with similar behavior have the same, and you have that land. So that is about community land ownership. Another form of land tenure is the private land tenure covered by Article 64 of the Constitution of Kenya, or individual land ownership, or modern land form of ownership. So it's the modern way that came after colonialism. After these people came in Kenya, colonized people, they came up with this individual land ownership. So the modern tenure or individual private tenure forms the basis of official policy towards land in Kenya. It dwells its roots to colonial instruments that sought to propagate the idea of agricultural production based on individual tenure system. The most significant of the instrument was published in 1954 as a plan to intensify agriculture, widely known as the Tenure Plan. So this plan was to intensify agriculture. So to prevent the community practices, they wanted to intensify agriculture by ensuring individual practices. So maybe community practices led to laziness and all those. So they wanted to intensify agricultural production to increase promote agriculture. So the Tenure Plan was introduced. This plan saw the problem of land in terms of tenure and technology of production. So the problem was to be addressed firstly by the creation of an indefeasible title, and secondly by intensification of agricultural production in the native areas. So the general expectation was that native will be able to get maximum return from their farms and therefore abandon the clamors for returns of land taken from the Europeans. So the Europeans had taken their land, these native people, so they wanted to increase their return and not dwell much thinking, or spend most of their time thinking about the land that was taken. So they wanted ways that they could themselves increase their ways of production by not thinking about the land that was taken, by just dwelling on their native way of producing things individually, which could then help them forget about the land that was taken from there by the Europeans. So the Tenure Plan was introduced as land tenure reform policy with the aim of property land ownership centered on individual customary tenure based on ownership by the community, and was thought to tie up land in many hands, hence serving as an obstacle to ascertainment of free market. So high level of investment were to be achieved, then land ownership had to be rescued from the yoke of customary ownership. So if they wanted to achieve high level of investment, they were to remove that land on the yoke of customary ownership and place it to individual ownership. So this will help match investment and will help in attainment of free market. So the agreement went further. It was said that customary land ownership created insecurities, and hence serving provided a poor intensive investment. So customary land ownership, they said, it provided poor investment. So agricultural growth on the century required the conversation on kinship-based system of customary tenure, incapable of being solid to formal individual titles that could be exchanged freely in the market. The report summarized the advantages of individual tenure system in the following words. Individual tenure was great advantage in giving there to the individual a sense of security in possession and enabling by purchasing the sale of land and adjustment made by the community from the present and unreceived. So it gave individuals that security of holding that piece of land. Then it encouraged investments. So the ability of individuals to buy and sell land by process of custom open doors to mobility and private initiative, or which was a great sector for economic progress. So mobility and private initiative was a great sector of economic progress. So you see, this private ownership helped in economic progress. So Article 64 of the Constitution defines this private land ownership, and according to Article 64, recognizes this tenure as private land consists of land registered and held by persons under freehold tenure. So land held by any person under leasehold tenure and others declared by the Acts of Parliament. So Article 64 defines private land as land declared to be held by a person under freehold and leasehold tenure, and land that has been classified as private land by the Act of Parliament. So that is about the land tenure systems in Kenya. We have three forms of land tenure system: private, public, and community land tenure system, and are described by Article 62, 63, and 64. Article 62 is about public land ownership, 63 is about community land, and 64 is about private land ownership. So those are the three modes of land ownership in Kenya, or describes the forms of land ownership in Kenya. So that is the end of my lecture, and stay calm to the end of my lecture. So that is the end of my lecture. Subscribe to Scott's Legal channel. Stay tuned for more episodes of Scott Talks Law are coming.